What if Jon Snow married Daenerys before the war for Westeros? 2 Targaryens, 1 throne, and a realm torn between love and loyalty. The fire met the frost, and everything changed. The snow in Dragonstone hadn't melted, even with the fire-breathing shadow of Drogon overhead. The north had come south, and now the fire had embraced the ice. Not in war, but in union. The wedding was sudden, held in the ancient hall where dragon lords once made blood pacts. No lords were invited, no banners flew. Only the roar of the sea outside bore witness to the vows between Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, and Daenerys Stormborn, the mother of dragons. The room stank of salt and smoke, and yet their hands clutched, as if sealing something far greater than love. A pact not only of hearts, but of claim. Jon had been reluctant, not out of lack of feeling, but out of fear. Fear of what this union meant for the North, for the people he'd sworn to protect, and for the blood truth he could no longer deny. He was her nephew. And yet, the war left no space for such sentiments. Daenerys, radiant in a cloak of black and crimson, had eyes that burned with something deeper than passion, purpose. She needed unity, he needed peace. Together they could be more than just lovers. They could be the realm's salvation. But in the cold corridors of Winterfell, whispers had already begun. She's a foreign queen, and now she's our queen? Dragon in the north. What's next, fire in the Godswood? Sansa's silence spoke loudest. She hadn't objected publicly, but the tightening around her lips whenever Daenerys entered the room told its own tale. Arya, sharper in both words and blade, simply asked Jon one question. Did you bend the knee or break your spine? Jon didn't answer her. Back in Dragonstone, the small council had transformed. Tyrion sat beside Missandei, his wine untouched. Varys's quiet eyes flicked between them, already calculating the ripples across Westeros. Love is the death of duty, he once believed, but now duty had married love, and that made it far more dangerous. Daenerys had declared herself not queen consort but equal monarch. We shall rule together, fire and ice side by side. No iron throne shall separate us, for we sit on it as one. Her words echoed with conviction, and Jon merely nodded. He'd never wanted the throne, but now it was under his feet, and so came the shift. Ravens flew to every corner of the realm, to Dawn, the Vale, the Reach. The message was clear. The Targaryens are united. A royal wedding, a new dynasty, a future forged in dragonflame and northern frost. But not everyone welcomed it. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister crushed the Raven Scroll without even reading half of it. "A bastard and a foreign whore," she spat. "Let them come." The Golden Company, purchased with Ironbank gold, stood ready. Euron Greyjoy, ever eager for blood, smirked. 2 dragons, 1 crown. Let's see if they can fly with their heads cut off. The realm held its breath, but inside the marriage, cracks had already begun to form. Jon still called her Dany in private, the name of a girl, not a queen. Daenerys, meanwhile, saw his reluctance as weakness. He spoke of peace with Cersei. She spoke of burning the Red Keep to its stones. He dreamed of rebuilding the wall. She dreamed of breaking everyone ever built. Still, they shared a bed. And when they stood together, the realm saw power. Terrifying. United, ancient. 2 Targaryens, 1 bloodline restored. Yet what they did not see was the Cold War in their silence. One night, beneath the dragonglass sky of Dragonstone, Jon stood staring into the black waves. Sam had sent word, proof, old records from the Citadel, a sealed book confirming his birthright, not just as Daenerys' kin, but as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. He hadn't told her, not yet, but Tyrion knew, and he warned him. If she finds out you're the true heir, she'll see your love as betrayal. Jon clenched his jaw. She's my wife. Tyrion tilted his head. That never stopped a Targaryen from choosing fire. Across the narrow sea, old flames stirred. Illyrio Mopatis sent word to Volantis. The Targaryens rise again. But which one will burn first? Meanwhile, beyond the wall, the true war was awakening. The Night King, undeterred by southern politics, had raised his army beyond numbers. Dead men walked. Giants thudded across ice. Viserion soared, now blue-flamed and undead, howling for his siblings. They had no time for marriage squabbles, and yet the kingdom did. Lords in the north called it betrayal. Glover refused to send men. Mormont's banner hung limp. Even House Stark stood divided. Jon received a raven from Sansa. "You may wear the crown, but the north remembers who you were." His hands trembled, Daenerys noticed. "You still think of them," she said. "They're my people," he replied. "And I'm your queen," she snapped, voice steel. "You swore yourself to me." He looked away. "And I meant it. But meaning doesn't win hearts." "You think I haven't earned it?" she whispered. He didn't answer. And silence in war is betrayal. In the darkness, dragons dreamed of fire. In the north, wolves began to howl. And between the two, a marriage made in love now stood in the way of the realm's last chance to survive. But no one knew yet. This wasn't just a union. It was a fuse, and it had already been lit. The first sign of fracture came not from the south, but from the north. Lady Lyanna Mormont, fierce even in youth, stood in front of her bannermen in Bear Island's great hall, eyes blazing like northern frost. Jon Snow was our king in the north, not some Targaryen prince playing consort to a dragon queen. The room murmured in agreement. Ravens had arrived with news of the marriage, and no one missed the phrasing. United monarchy. King and queen. But to the north, it felt like submission disguised in silk. In Winterfell, Sansa read the raven over and over. The seal was real, the signature in Jon's own hand. He had married Daenerys Targaryen, without asking her, without consulting the bannerman, without even telling her of his true heritage. Her fingers crushed the parchment. "He's forgotten what the North gave him," she told Arya, who merely sat sharpening her blade. Arya didn't look up. "He hasn't forgotten, he's choosing." Sansa's lips thinned. "He was supposed to protect us from her, not become one of her pawns." Arya's blade paused mid-motion. "Maybe he isn't the pawn." Down in Dragonstone, Jon stood in the war room with Daenerys and her inner circle. The table, carved like Westeros, had new markers on it. The Golden Company in King's Landing, Euron's fleet off the coast, and blue-stained pebbles moving southward from Eastwatch. The undead were coming. "We should strike now," Daenerys said. "If we burn King's Landing, the throne is ours before the dead even arrive. One dragon, one pass, and Cersei's done." Jon shook his head. "If we waste strength fighting Cersei, the North will fall before we even reach it. She has the Golden Company, Jon. She's building strength while we wait. If she's not dealt with now, we'll fight on two fronts." Jon leaned over the table, voice hard. "And if the Night King gets past the wall, there won't be two fronts. There won't be a throne. There'll be nothing left to sit on." Silence. Tyrion cleared his throat. "If I may, perhaps a delay of a fortnight. We could use the time to sway more houses." Daenerys cut him off. "We don't need houses, we have dragons." "And we had people," Jon muttered. "Until they saw the fire and forgot the faces." She turned to him, eyes flaring. "What do you mean?" Jon met her gaze, firm. "You're becoming what they feared you'd be." For the first time since their wedding, she looked at him as if he were not her husband, but a threat. Later that night, Tyrion found Jon standing alone on the cliffs. "She's changing," Jon said quietly. "No," Tyrion replied, sipping his wine. "She's becoming what she always was. You're just seeing it clearly now." Jon didn't respond. Tyrion leaned beside him. "The North is stirring. Sansa's refusing ravens. Your bannermen are calling you a traitor." "I never wanted their crowns." "No, but you had their trust, and that's harder to win back than any throne." Meanwhile, in the south, Cersei Lannister sat on her borrowed throne, a goblet in hand, watching Qyburn arrange poisoned crossbow bolts on the table. "Their marriage is perfect," she mused. "Two dragons, one nest. Sooner or later, one eats the other." Qyburn raised an eyebrow. "Shall we still prepare the wildfire caches?" Cersei smiled. "Oh, we'll burn, but only once they've burned each other." Back in the north, Tormund arrived at Winterfell, face pale, voice low. "The wall is gone." Sansa stood frozen, Arya's breath caught. Tormund nodded grimly. "Eastwatch fell. The dead are marching. Thousands. More." "Where's Jon?" Sansa asked. "Dragonstone. And with him the only two creatures that could stop what was now coming." In Dragonstone's chambers, Daenerys stood before the fire, her bare back to Jon. "I thought this would unite us," she whispered. "It still can." She turned. "Can it? When your sister defies me, when your people mock me, when you speak of peace while war pounds at our gates." Jon walked forward. "Because we're trying to save something, not rule over ash." She stepped close, touching his chest. "Then let them burn, and from the ashes we'll build a better world." He looked down at her hand. "And if I burn with them?" She didn't flinch. "Then you never truly stood with me." He backed away, his breath caught between rage and sorrow. The next morning, Jon wrote a letter. He sealed it with Stark wax, not Targaryen red. "Sansa," it read, "I chose what I thought would save us, but perhaps I've just made the flames rise faster. Prepare the north, the dead march." But he didn't send it. He burned it. Instead, he summoned Davos, Tyrion, and Grey Worm. "We ride north." Daenerys didn't object. She simply said, "I'll bring the dragons." Yet as she stood on Drogon's back, high above the snow-covered fields, she no longer saw Jon beside her. She saw a man slipping away. Below, Varys watched, quiet, calculating. "He's the true heir," he whispered to Tyrion. "He has the blood, the crown." Tyrion turned to him. "He has no ambition." Varys replied coldly, "That makes him the most dangerous man alive." The snowstorm over Winterfell had no mercy. It swallowed the sky, the banners, even the walls themselves in a curtain of white so thick the dead moved in silence. Scouts had stopped coming back. Watchmen on the walls whispered of shadows, huge, lumbering, bone-cracking shadows, moving just beyond the tree line, and then the horn blew, once, twice, 3 times. Death had arrived. Inside the great hall, Sansa stood at the head of the map table, eyes hollow. Brienne was at her side, armored and silent. Arya paced behind them like a restless wolf. They had prepared for this, trained for it, but the North still felt unready. You're never ready for the end of the world. And yet, through the storm, came wings. 2 shadows tore through the blizzard, roaring fire into the white void. Jon and Daenerys had arrived. Drogon and Rhaegal landed hard just outside the battlements, shaking the earth. Jon dismounted first. Daenerys followed, silent, regal, colder than the storm around her. Her eyes scanned the keep, then Sansa, then the crumbling horizon where thousands of blue eyes marched slowly toward them. No greetings, no warmth, only the thundering of the dead closing in. In the strategy chamber, they gathered once more. The last time, maybe, they ever would. Jon stood at the head of the table now, not as king, not as Targaryen, as soldier. "We draw them into the Godswood," he said. "Bran will be the bait. The Night King will come for him. We use the dragons to burn the flanks and trap him." Daenerys didn't look up from the map. "And if he brings Viserion? Then I kill my brother," Jon replied, voice firm. "Again," Sansa cut in, her voice sharp. "You're assuming we can even hold them that long. The crypts are full. So of bones, are we really that blind?" Tyrion blinked. "You think he can raise the dead in the crypts?" "He's done worse," Arya muttered. Daenerys didn't like being sidelined. "We have dragons, we have fire. This isn't hopeless," Varys murmured from a corner. "Hope is not a strategy, Your Grace." Daenerys turned to him, and for a moment the temperature in the room dropped further. But Jon held her gaze, and slowly she turned away. Outside, the horns sounded again. This time not warning of arrival, but contact. The dead had reached the walls, and the battle began. Dothraki riders, torches in hand, charged into the white storm. Their lights vanished one by one. Within minutes the field was silent again. Until the screaming started, catapults launched fire, archers loosed. The Unsullied formed perfect lines defending retreating infantry as whites swarmed like waves. The snow was soaked red, then black. Jon rode Rhaegal above the battlefield, scanning desperately for the Night King. Daenerys soared beside him on Drogon, fire pouring down like rain. Entire swaths of undead exploded into ash beneath her fury. But it wasn't enough. They kept coming. At the gates of Winterfell, Grey Worm gave the signal. The Unsullied pulled back, trapping the dead inside the kill zone. Brienne, Jaime, Podrick all fought shoulder to shoulder, blades flashing, blood flying. Sam nearly dropped his sword twice. Gilly screamed from the crypt below where the children huddled, and in the Godswood Bran waited. The trees whispered something only he could hear. "He is coming." Jon spotted him then. The Night King rode Viserion through the storm like a ghost from a nightmare. Blue fire lit the sky. The dragon's ribs were open, wings shredded, yet it flew, howling, broken, furious. Jon dove. Rhaegal and Viserion collided mid-air in a crash of bone and fire. Daenerys shouted something, but her voice was lost in the wind. Jon was thrown from Rhaegal. He landed hard in the snow, sword in hand. A ring of whites turned their heads toward him, but before they could move, Arya was there, spinning, slashing, stabbing, death meeting death. She gave him a nod. "Get to the Godswood." He ran. Daenerys stayed airborne, diving toward the Night King. Drogon blasted fire straight at him, and again. Nothing. He stood in the center of the flame, untouched, smiling, and then he raised his arms. Every fallen soldier on the battlefield, Dothraki, Unsullied, Stark, began to twitch, to rise, to turn. Sansa watched from the battlements, mouth open in horror. "We're already dead." But in the crypts below, worse things happened. The ancient kings, sealed in stone, began to claw their way out. Bones, dust, and hatred filled the tunnels. Gilly screamed. Children were dragged into darkness. Tyrion and Sansa led survivors through pitch-black corridors. He handed her a dagger. She looked at him. "I don't know how to use this." "Stick them with the pointy end," he said softly. Back in the Godswood, Jon reached Bran just as the Night King stepped through the trees. Jon drew Longclaw. The Night King lifted his hand, and the whites surged forward. Jon screamed, charging. Through the dead, slashing and cutting toward his brother. But the circle never shrank. He couldn't reach him. And then fire. Drogon landed behind the Night King. Daenerys stood atop him, eyes blazing. She whispered the words, "Dracarys." Fire consumed the grove. Jon shielded his eyes. When the flame cleared, the Night King still stood. He raised his spear, aimed it at Drogon. Daenerys didn't see it coming. Jon did. He ran, screaming, too late. The spear flew. Drogon roared in pain. The dragon spiraled. One wing pierced. Daenerys fell. Jon reached her as she hit the ground, unconscious but breathing. The Night King was only steps away. Jon stood between them. This was it. And then a blur moved through the trees. Arya, a single leap, the dagger in her hand. But this time, the Night King was ready. He caught her mid-air, snapped her wrist. The dagger fell. Jon caught it. And in one final motion, he drove it through the Night King's chest. The Night King shattered. Whites collapsed. The storm stopped, and silence reigned. But nothing ended. Not truly. Because when Jon looked at Daenerys, when she woke in his arms, the fire in her eyes had changed. This war had cost her everything. And now, all that remained was the throne, even if it meant turning on the only man who had just saved her. The fires from Winterfell still smoldered when the whispers began. The battle was won, yes, but at what cost? Thousands of bodies, both northern and foreign, littered the fields. The crypts had been emptied of the dead and filled with the freshly killed. Every hall echoed with silence that screamed louder than war drums. Children cried for parents that would never return, and amidst it all, the so-called saviors, Jon and Daenerys, stood victorious, but distant, and the North watched. Jon walked the ramparts at dawn, eyes raw, hands trembling. He had slain the Night King with Arya's dagger, saved the realm, yet the people didn't cheer. They bowed hesitantly. They watched him with confusion, some with awe, others with doubt. The king in the north, who now rode dragons, married the Dragon Queen and rose from the dead. No one said it aloud, but the thought spread like wildfire. What was Jon Snow now? Sansa didn't wait to ask. She cornered him in the crypts, the stone faces of dead Starks watching them. "You should have told me," she said, cold as the air. Jon didn't look at her. "It wouldn't have changed anything. You're the rightful heir," she said, "to the Iron Throne, to House Targaryen. And you married her instead? I married her to unite the realm. No, Sansa whispered. You married her to hide from what you are. Jon turned, jaw tight. I don't want the throne. But she does, Sansa hissed, and she'll burn anyone who stands in her way, even you. That night a secret left Winterfell in the mouth of a raven. Sam had written it. Sansa had sent it. Varys would be the one to catch it, and once he read it, he burned it after making 5 copies. In the great hall, Daenerys stood at the head of a battered room. The survivors had gathered, the northern lords weary and blood-stained. The Vale, the Riverlands, even Brienne, Sir Davos and the Hound. She addressed them like a queen, but her voice carried something new. Edge. The war against death is won. And now, we must win the war against tyranny, she said, voice echoing. Cersei Lannister sits on a throne built on lies, paid for in blood. But I will take what is mine, what belongs to all of us. The North did not cheer. They listened, and they remained silent. Tyrion approached Jon later, alone in the library. His face was pale. She knows. Jon blinked. What? About your birth, your name, your blood. Jon's breath caught. I didn't tell her. You didn't. Have to, Tyrion said. Varys has. And he's begun speaking with the lords of Westeros, quietly, carefully, but it's spreading. Jon's head fell into his hands. Tyrion stepped closer. You are her biggest threat, Jon. Not because you want the throne, but because others want it for you. I would never betray her. Tyrion lowered his voice. She's beginning to think you already have. 2 nights later, Varys was executed. He didn't plead, he didn't beg. As Drogon's flame consumed him, he simply looked at Jon with calm eyes and said, I hope I was wrong. Jon didn't sleep that night. Neither did Daenerys. When he visited her chambers, she was standing at the window, staring at the black horizon beyond the wall. Her voice was cold. They love you, she said. They follow you. They fear me. He hesitated. They will in time. No, she whispered. They won't. Not as long as you're alive. The silence was heavier than steel. You would kill me? Jon said, voice barely audible. She turned to him. I would kill anyone who takes the world I've built from me. And in that moment, Jon saw her. Not the woman he loved. Not the breaker of chains. He saw what Sansa had. Warned of, he stepped away from her. She didn't follow. The march to King's Landing began, one last war, one final enemy. But inside the Targaryen camp, 2 fires burned, one of ambition, the other of growing suspicion. Daenerys barely spoke to Jon. She conferred only with Grey Worm. Missandei, her last tether to mercy, had died during the battle. Tyrion feared her silence more than her rage. And still the city waited. Cersei had packed the Red Keep with thousands of innocents. The Golden Company stood at the gates. Scorpions lined the walls. And somewhere beneath it all, wildfire waited. Tyrion begged Daenerys. Let them surrender. She said nothing. He tried again. If the bells ring, you'll stop. Promise me. That much. She nodded, but something in her eyes said otherwise. As dawn broke over King's Landing, Jon stood atop a hill, watching the capital he had never wanted. He looked at Daenerys one last time, hoping to see the woman who saved Meereen, who freed the Unsullied, who once whispered her fears into his chest. But all he saw now was fire, and fire was coming. The sun rose over King's Landing, but no warmth came with it. Smoke had already begun to curl over the city walls, the smell of ash riding on the wind like a curse. Children clutched their mothers. Bells hung silent in their towers, waiting, hoping for a chance to stop what was coming. But every breath in the capital felt like a countdown now. Everyone knew this wasn't just another battle. This was the end of something, and maybe the beginning of something far worse. Jon stood among the northern forces just beyond the city gates. Ser Davos at his side. Arya was already gone. She'd slipped inside the walls under cover of darkness, a dagger hidden in her belt and vengeance in her heart. The Hound followed close behind, muttering only one thing as he passed Jon. She dies today. Jon barely acknowledged it. His eyes were locked on the sky. Tyrion approached slowly, looking 10 years older than the day before. His voice was quiet. I tried to stop it." Jon didn't ask what he meant. He already knew. "She won't wait for surrender," Tyrion whispered. Jon's jaw tightened. "She said she would." Tyrion's gaze drifted toward the city. "She says many things." And then the gates of the city opened, not to attack, but to surrender. The Golden Company broke rank and dropped their weapons. Thousands of civilians poured into the streets with hands raised. The Lannister soldiers, Cersei's army, stood confused, many dropping their swords. It was over. The bells began to ring. Loud, clear, hopeful, and then they stopped. Not because the surrender was complete, but because the fire began. Drogon dove from the sky like a god of vengeance. Fire erupted across the city walls. The Golden Company, unarmed, burned alive. Buildings crumbled, women screamed, men ran for their lives, only to be caught by columns of flame so hot it melted flesh from bone. Daenerys didn't stop. She didn't. Even slow down. She flew over surrendering soldiers, over unarmed civilians, and she burned them all. Jon watched in horror. The Lannister army dropped their swords completely. Civilians flooded the alleyways. Mothers screamed for their children. But Drogon roared again, and fire turned the cobblestones into rivers of molten blood. Ser Davos pulled Jon back. "You have to stop her." Jon stood frozen. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Davos shouted. "She trusts you. Gods help us. She loved you." Jon drew his sword. "And now I have to kill her." Inside the Red Keep, Arya and the Hound reached the main staircase. The sky above them glowed orange. "You should go," the Hound said. Arya blinked. "I came to kill Cersei. She's dead already, and if you stay, you'll die too." Arya hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Thank you." He gave her a small nod, his first kindness. She ran. He walked up the stairs toward his brother, toward fire, toward death. Outside, Jon Snow tried to rally what men he could, but it was chaos. Daenerys had set the very ground ablaze. Northern. Soldiers joined in the slaughter. Unsullied speared the helpless. Grey Worm cut down surrendering Lannisters with fury in his eyes and blood on his blade. Jon screamed for them to stop. No one listened. He watched a girl, no older than 8, get crushed beneath rubble. He held her hand as she died. When he stood again, something inside him had broken. He looked up at the sky. He had made a mistake. Cersei stood in the Red Keep, watching her city fall. The fire danced in her eyes. But for once, there was no cruelty, only disbelief. "She's killing everyone," she whispered. Qyburn tried to pull her away. "We must leave, Your Grace." But there was nowhere to go. Drogon's fire ripped through the foundation of the castle. The mountain killed Qyburn without blinking. Then, like prophecy, Clegane and the mountain faced off, brother against brother, monster against fire. And while they died together in the flames, Arya ran. Ash fell like snow. She ran through corpses, through blood, through fire. She saw mothers burned alive. She saw soldiers laughing as they slaughtered innocents. She saw a white horse standing silent amid the horror. But she kept running, because if Jon didn't stop Daenerys, no one would. Jon reached the center square as Drogon landed. Daenerys dismounted. Her face was unreadable, calm even. Like she had finally done what she was born to do. The Iron Throne wasn't even in front of her yet, but she looked as though she already sat on it. Jon approached slowly. "Why?" he asked, voice low. Daenerys looked at him. "Because they had their chance. They chose fear. They surrendered," Jon said, voice cracking. The bells rang. Daenerys stepped toward him. "And what then, Jon? Do we let Cersei's rot remain beneath the stones? Do we let their children grow into tyrants?" he whispered. "You burned them, Dany." "Innocents." "There are no innocents in war," she replied. He looked at her like a stranger. "You sound like her." Daenerys' face flickered just for a moment. Hurt, then resolve. "This is mercy," she said. "Mercy for the future. Mercy for the world we will build." Jon didn't move. She stepped closer, placed her hand on his chest. "We were meant to rule together. You and me, the world will follow us." Jon looked into her eyes. "I love you," he said, and then he kissed her. Her eyes fluttered shut, and as they stood there in the ashes of the world she had burned, Jon plunged the dagger. "Into her heart," she gasped. Her hands clutched his chest. No fire came, no rage, only confusion. She collapsed into his arms, her blood on his hands, her eyes never leaving his. And then, silence. Drogon landed behind him, letting out a roar so loud it shattered stone. He nudged. "Daenerys' body," cried once. Then instead of burning Jon, he turned his fire on the Iron Throne, melted it into nothing, and flew away, carrying her body into the sky. Jon collapsed to his knees, alone, victorious, broken. The city burned for days. No one celebrated. There were no songs, no toasts, no banners fluttering in triumph. Only ash. It coated the ruins like snowfall, sticking to skin, hair, armor, ghostly and inescapable. King's Landing wasn't conquered. It had been erased, and the man who ended it, Jon Snow, sat in silence beneath the blackened sky, blood still dried on his hands. They found him kneeling in the great hall. Daenerys' blood had soaked the floor where the Iron Throne once stood. Now nothing more than molten steel. Jon hadn't moved. Not when Drogon flew away. Not when Grey Worm burst into the chamber, saw her lifeless body gone, and roared like a man already dead inside. They didn't kill him. Not yet. Grey Worm chained him with his own hands. He said nothing. No words. No accusations. His eyes said, everything. Tyrion was next. He walked into the ruined hall with slow, heavy steps. The moment he saw Jon, he understood. "She's gone?" Jon nodded. Tyrion closed his eyes. "And you?" "I'm still here," Jon whispered. "Pity," Tyrion murmured. "She might have burned the world, but she would have lived to rule it." Jon turned his head slowly. "Would you have stopped her?" Tyrion looked away. "I tried." And neither man said anything more. The aftermath didn't begin with justice. It began with chaos. Grey Worm executed dozens of captured Lannister soldiers in the city square. "Orders," he said. "Justice." The people screamed. Some tried to flee. Others begged the Unsullied for mercy. But their queen was dead, and they were angry, leaderless, and untethered. Word spread quickly, not just through the streets, but across Westeros. Daenerys Targaryen was dead, killed by Jon Snow, and everyone had something to say about it. In Winterfell, Sansa received the raven. She read it aloud only once. Then she crumpled it in her fist. "He did what I hoped he wouldn't," she said, "and exactly what he had to." In the Vale, Jon Royce cursed aloud. "A dragon queen dead by her nephew's hand. The realm won't survive this." In the Reach, Gendry Baratheon pounded the table. "He killed a queen, my queen." In Dorne, they drank to her name and said nothing of Jon Snow, but the lords and ladies still came from the Riverlands, from the Eyrie, from Dorne, from the Stormlands. Even Yara Greyjoy arrived, her face like stone. Her ships anchored with unsullied patrols keeping watch. They gathered in the Dragon Pit, just as they had once before, to decide the fate of the realm. Jon wasn't brought before them. He was locked, in a cell beneath the Red Keep, guarded by Unsullied who wouldn't even speak his name. It was Tyrion who stood trial. Grey Worm stood before them all, face hollow, eyes full of fury. "You want to talk of justice?" he said. "You want to name a king? Then speak to the murder of your queen first." Tyrion stood in the center of them all, broken, weary. "I won't argue her death," he said. "She was a conqueror, a liberator, a symbol. But she burned children in the street. She left no room for peace, only obedience. And Jon Snow ended her reign before there was no realm left to save." Yara Greyjoy stood furious. "She freed the Iron Islands, gave us back our names. He murdered her." Arya stepped forward. "Say that again and I'll slit your throat." "Where you stand." Tension broke across the pit like lightning. Sansa raised her hand. "Enough." She looked at Tyrion. "So what happens now?" He turned slowly, meeting every eye around him. "We choose." And so they debated, for hours. Some named Gendry, the last Baratheon. Others backed Yara, ruler of a free people. Some suggested Edmure Tully, who stood and began to speak, before Sansa told him to sit down. But then Tyrion looked to Bran. "The realm is broken," he said. "And who better to lead us than the one who can see it all? Who better to shape the future than the boy who remembers everything about the past?" There was silence. Then murmurs. Then nods. Bran Stark, the Broken, was named King of Westeros. Not by birth, not by conquest, by choice, but before the meeting ended, Sansa stepped forward. The North bled for the realm. For dragons, for queens, for kings, and now for peace. No more. She turned to Bran. "The North will remain independent, a free kingdom, and I will lead it." Bran nodded. So the 7 kingdoms became 6, and Westeros breathed a different kind of air for the first time in centuries. As for Jon, he never heard the cheers. He never saw the crown passed. Grey Worm came to him, shackled and furious. "Your life belongs to me." But Tyrion intervened. "If we kill him," Tyrion said, "he becomes a martyr, a symbol. But if we send him to the wall, he becomes forgotten. A ghost." Grey Worm's lips curled. "There is no wall." "There is now," Tyrion replied. "It's being rebuilt. And he'll take no wife, no lands, no children, just a life of service." It wasn't justice, but it was compromise. And so Jon Snow rode north once more, exiled, forgotten, not as a king, not as a prince, not even as a Targaryen, just as Jon. The wall had changed. It wasn't the towering, impenetrable force Jon remembered. Whole sections had collapsed. Others stood cracked and leaning, like the old gods themselves had struck it with 1,000 fists. The cold was the same, though. That dry, merciless chill that cut through fur and leather like knives. The kind of cold that made your bones whisper things you didn't want to hear. Jon arrived without ceremony. No horn, no watchman. Just a lone gate that groaned as it opened, and a handful of black-cloaked men waiting inside, their faces unfamiliar. Boys, mostly, recruits who hadn't seen a single White Walker, who had only heard stories of what used to live beyond the wall. They looked at him like a ghost, and in a way he was. Ghost was the only familiar one. The direwolf leapt from the shadows the moment Jon passed through the gates. No bark, no growl, just quiet recognition. A reunion between 2 creatures who never really belonged anywhere else. Jon knelt, buried his hands in Ghost's fur and, for a long moment, said nothing. There were no words left. Castle Black was mostly abandoned. The Night's Watch had once stood over 1,000 strong. Now it barely scraped 50. Jon was given a room. Bare walls, no fire, one window looking out toward the snow-covered north. He didn't speak much, didn't eat much. At night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Daenerys' final. Breath again and again. Not the moment the blade sank in, no, that happened too fast. But her eyes, the betrayal, the disbelief. The fading light. He had loved her and he had killed her, and now he was here again. A week passed before he spoke more than a sentence, not until Tormund arrived. The wildling barreled into Castle Black like a storm of red hair and snowflakes, laughing, as if the end of the world had never happened. "Thought you were dead," he said, clapping Jon on the shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Or king. Turns out you're neither." Jon managed a half-smile. "Turns out I'm just breathing." Tormund squinted at him. "Aye, but for how long, Snow?" They sat that night by the fire, drinking what passed for ale. "You ever think we were wrong?" Jon asked quietly. Tormund snorted. "About what?" "Everything." Tormund shrugged. "I think we lived, that's all. The rest is stories." Jon looked into the flames. "And what story am I now?" Tormund leaned in. "The one who broke the wheel, whether you meant to or not." Jon didn't answer, because the truth was, he hadn't meant to. Not any of it. He hadn't meant to become a Targaryen. Hadn't meant to fall in love with Daenerys. Hadn't meant to kill her, and he certainly hadn't meant to survive it all. A month passed. Jon resumed his duties, patrolling the wall, training recruits, feeding the ravens. It was the life he once knew. But everything about it felt like punishment now. He barely spoke, he barely slept, and some nights, when the sky was clear, he stared north, toward the haunted forest, toward the true wild. the place where nothing was written. That was when Arya came. She arrived without fanfare, riding a pale horse through the snow like death itself. Jon didn't recognize her until she was off the saddle pulling back her hood. He stood in disbelief. "You shouldn't be here," he said. She tilted her head. "Neither should you." They embraced, not as lord and lady, not as a Stark, and a traitor, just as brother and sister. Ghost howled softly in greeting. Arya didn't stay long. A single night, they walked the wall together, silent at first. Then she spoke. "I never hated her," Arya said. "Daenerys, I know. She scared me. But I saw what she could have been." Jon looked down at the snow. "So did I." Arya studied him. "You're not the same." "I'm not sure I ever was," Jon said. She hesitated. "I'm going west, past the maps." Jon turned. "Why?" "I need to see what's left." "What's beyond all this death?" He nodded slowly. "I wanted to say goodbye," she added. He stepped forward and hugged her again. "Go find something worth living for," he said. "You too," she replied, but neither of them truly believed the other would. Arya left. Jon stood at the edge of the forest. He didn't go back to Castle Black, he walked north. Ghost followed. No one stopped him. No one asked. Somewhere along the way, Tormund caught up with him, laughing, dragging two half-drunk wildlings behind him. "So it's true then," he said. "The King of the North rides again." Jon said nothing because there was no crown, no throne, no war, just snow and silence, and the faint hope that maybe, beyond the wall, he could finally find peace. The trees grew wilder the farther north they went, thicker, older. No longer the twisted white bark of the weirwoods, but dark giants with limbs like ancient arms, reaching toward a sky that never seemed to clear. Snow fell less here, not because it was warmer, but because the clouds above were too heavy, too constant, as if the sky itself had forgotten how to let go. Jon passed the remnants of old wildling camps, abandoned fire pits, bones, markings carved into trees he couldn't read. But they weren't afraid anymore. The threat of the White Walkers was gone, the Night King was dead, and the land itself, it breathed differently now. Ghost moved ahead, his white fur disappearing and reappearing between the trunks. Tormund and a small group of free folk followed behind, but they never asked questions. They didn't need to. Jon had led them once. He was leading again, not with words, not with orders, but simply by walking forward, and they followed. Because men like him didn't belong behind walls. Back in Westeros, the realm was trying to remember itself. King Bran the Broken sat the throne, or what passed for it now. Not the iron monstrosity of melted blades, but a wooden chair carved from the heart tree of Winterfell. Maesters called him the Seer King. He didn't hold court every day, he didn't make speeches, but when he did speak, people listened, because his voice wasn't loud, but it was final. Tyrion served as hand, thinner now, quieter, older. He had stopped drinking, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't forget Varys's eyes as the flames took him. Brienne was named Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, her white cloak never stained, her sword always sharp. She visited Jaime's, page in the Book of Brothers once a week, never wrote more, just looked. Sansa ruled the north. The crown she wore wasn't gold, it was ironwood and leather, shaped like the branches of a tree. She rebuilt Winterfell, reopened the granaries, forged trade routes through the frost. The north loved her not because she was loud, but because she didn't lie. And Arya? She was a myth now. Sailors spoke of a Stark girl who traveled west on a ship without sails, who hunted krakens, who rode with faceless men and stole death itself. No one had seen her, no one had heard from her, and yet her name carried through taverns like wind through leaves, Arya of the Void. Jon built no home beyond the wall. He didn't settle, didn't marry, didn't claim a title. He hunted, fished, sat by fires, watched the sky change when it changed at all. Sometimes he helped the wildlings move from one valley to another. Sometimes he walked alone for days. At night he dreamed of black wings, of silver hair, of snow so deep it swallowed everything he'd ever known. He never saw the wall again. Didn't need to. because for the first time in his life, he wasn't protecting anyone. And yet, he'd never felt more at peace. Years passed. The realm stabilized. Mostly Gendry ruled Storm's End. Samwell Tarly became Grand Maester, his book, A Song of Ice and Fire, a record of the Great War, the Long Night, and the Fall of Dragons. He never included Jon's true name, not because he forgot it, but because he knew Jon would never want it remembered, because Jon Snow died the day Daenerys fell, and the man who walked into the forest beyond the wall had no name left to give. One winter morning, a raven arrived in King's Landing. Its message was short, written in rough wildling script. The king in the snow walks still. Tyrion read it, smiled once, and burned it. Because legends didn't belong in chains, and Jon Snow had never needed a crown. Far beyond the wall, in a glade untouched by war or fire, Jon sat beneath a tree with Ghost at his side. A distant howl echoed. The wind shifted. Snowflakes danced on his beard. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life no one needed him, and that finally was enough.